The first rays of sunlight pierce through the bulletproof windows of the Ryansong residence, casting golden streaks across the marble floors of the Supreme Leader's private quarters. Kim Jong-un awakens not to the sound of military fanfare or urgent state business, but to the gentle melody of a vintage Swiss music box or gift from his father that sits on his mahogany nightstand. The melody is Edelweiss, a song he heard during his school years in Switzerland, a time when he was simply a young student named Pak, trying to fit in with classmates who had no idea of his true identity. He lies still for a moment, listening to the delicate chimes, allowing himself this brief window of normalcy before the weight of leadership descends upon him once again. His bedroom is surprisingly modest by dictator standards. No gold-plated fixtures or excessive opulence, just clean lines, modern furniture, and a collection of books ranging from military strategy to Western philosophy. On his bedside table, next to the music box, sits a well-worn copy of The Art of War alongside a more recent edition, a biography of Steve Jobs. Coroner's dog-eared from repeated reading. Kim Jong-un swings his legs out of bed, his feet finding the heated floor panels that keep the room at precisely 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. He pads across to the window, pulling aside the heavy curtains to survey the grounds below. Gardeners are already at work, tending to the meticulously maintained landscape, their movements choreographed with military precision. He watches them for a moment, wondering if they ever think about the irony of their situation: perfectly manicured gardens in a nation where many struggle to find adequate food. The thought passes quickly, as it must. Such considerations are luxuries he cannot afford if he is to maintain his position. He turns away from the window and makes his way to the bathroom, where his morning routine begins. The bathroom is equipped with every modern convenience: a rainfall shower imported from Germany, Italian marble countertops, and a mirror that doubles as a television screen. But this morning, Kim Jong-un forgoes the television, preferring silence as he brushes his teeth with imported toothpaste that tastes faintly of mint and cinnamon. He examines his reflection critically, noting the slight puffiness around his eyes from a late night reviewing intelligence reports. His distinctive haircut, which has become the subject of countless memes and international commentary, requires daily maintenance. He summons his personal barber, who arrives within minutes, tools already prepared. The barber works in respectful silence, knowing that the Supreme Leader prefers quiet during this ritual. The haircut is not just a style choice, it's a carefully calculated image decision, meant to evoke both his grandfather's legacy and a modern, youthful energy. Every strand must be perfect, every line precise. After his grooming is complete, Kim Jong-un moves to his walk-in closet, which contains rows of identical outfits, the black mouse suits that have become his trademark. Alongside Western-style business suits he occasionally wears for specific diplomatic functions. He selects a black suit, white shirt, and his standard tie, dressing with practiced efficiency. His valet stands ready to assist, but Kim Jong-un waves him away. He prefers to dress himself when possible, one of the few tasks he performs without assistance. Before leaving his bedroom, he pauses at a small shrine dedicated to his father and grandfather. He doesn't pray in the traditional sense, but he does take a moment of reflection, asking himself the question he asks every morning: what would they do? It's both a source of guidance and a heavy burden, this constant comparison to his predecessors. He places his hand on the frame of his grandfather's portrait, a gesture he's performed every morning since assuming power, then turns and walks out the door. The hallway outside his quarters is lined with guards who snap to attention as he passes. He acknowledges them with a slight nod, maintaining the careful balance between approachability and authority. His personal secretary, a meticulous woman in her 40s named Choi Sun-hai, falls into step beside him, tablet in hand, already listing the day's schedule. "Good morning, Supreme Leader. You have a meeting with the agricultural ministers at 9, followed by a review of the new missile guidance systems at 11. Lunch is scheduled with the visiting Chinese delegation. And this afternoon, Kim Jong-un raises a hand, cutting her off gently. Coffee first, Secretary Choi. Always coffee first." She smiles slightly, one of the few people permitted such familiarity. "Of course, Supreme Leader. Your breakfast is waiting in the private dining room." The private dining room is a comfortable space, far removed from the grand banquet halls used for state functions. Here, the table seats only 6, and the decor is warm rather than imposing. His breakfast has already laid out a selection of fresh fruits, imported cereals, Korean rice dishes, and his particular favorite, Swiss cheese and bread, a taste acquired during his school years abroad. But the centerpiece of his breakfast is always the same, a perfectly brewed cup of coffee made from beans, personally selected and roasted for him. He sits down, dismissing the servants with a gesture, preferring to eat alone. As he sips his coffee, he opens his personal tablet, not the official government-issued device, but a specially secured tablet that contains his private files, photos, and a curated selection of international news. This is his window to the outside world, carefully filtered but more honest than the reports his ministers provide. He scrolls through headlines from CNN, BBC, The New York Times, reading about himself through the eyes of the international community. Dictator, tyrant, madman, the words are familiar, almost comforting in their consistency. He wonders sometimes what they would think if they could see him now, eating Swiss cheese and reading their articles over morning coffee, just another human starting his day. He reads an article about economic sanctions and their impact on his country. The journalist writes with confidence about the inevitable collapse of his regime, about the suffering of his people, painting him as a villain in a simple narrative of good versus evil. Kim Jong-un sets down the tablet and takes another sip of coffee. If only it were that simple, he thinks. If only they understood the impossible balancing act he performs every day, maintaining power among generals who would happily stage a coup, managing relations with superpowers who view his nation as a chess piece, feeding a population in a country with limited arable land and crippling sanctions. He finishes his breakfast and stands, leaving the private dining room behind. The day's official duties await, but for just a moment longer. He allows himself to be simply a man who enjoyed his morning coffee, before transforming once again into the supreme leader, the public figure, the role he can never escape. The walk from his private quarters to the main administrative building takes Kim Jong-un through a series of corridors adorned with revolutionary art and photographs, documenting the Kim dynasty's rule over North Korea. These hallways are a museum of his family's history, and he cannot traverse them without feeling the weight of 3 generations bearing down on his shoulders. He pauses before a massive portrait of his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, the nation's founder and eternal president. The painting depicts him as larger than life, heroic, almost godlike in its reverence. Kim Jong-un studies the face he knows, so well a face he's been told he resembles, a resemblance deliberately cultivated through hairstyle, weight management, and even subtle mannerisms. The comparison is both his greatest asset and his heaviest burden. Kim Il-sung had the revolutionary credentials, the charisma, the benefit of founding a nation. Kim Jong-un has only the legacy, expected to fill shoes that seem impossibly large. Next to his grandfather hangs a portrait of his father, Kim Jong-il, depicted in his trademark khaki jumpsuit and oversized sunglasses. His father's rule was marked by the devastating famine of the 1990s, international isolation, and the acceleration of the nuclear weapons program. Yet his father had also been groomed for leadership for decades, carefully prepared and positioned. Kim Jong-un, by contrast, had been thrust into power in his late 20s, younger than anyone expected, his older brother having been passed over after an embarrassing incident trying to visit Tokyo Disneyland on a fake passport. The absurdity of that event, his brother's political downfall, triggered by a theme park visit, is not lost on Kim Jong-un. History and destiny sometimes turn on the strangest hinges. He continues walking, his entourage maintaining a respectful distance behind him. Secretary Choi has learned over the years to recognize these moments when the supreme leader needs space for contemplation, and she subtly signals the others to hang back. The corridor opens into the Great Hall, a vast space designed to overwhelm with its scale and grandeur. Massive chandeliers hang from the vaulted ceiling, each containing thousands of crystals that create dancing rainbows when the morning light hits them just right. The floor is polished marble, so reflective that visitors can see their reflections walking beside them. At the far end of the hall stands a golden statue of his grandfather, hands outstretched as if embracing the nation. Kim Jong-un has crossed this hall thousands of times, yet he never quite gets used to the statue. It's too much, he thinks privately, too ostentatious. But it serves a purpose, reinforcing the mythology, the divine mandate that legitimizes his rule. In a rational world, he might be just another hereditary leader of a small nation. But this is not a rational world, and North Korea is not a typical nation. It is a nation built on mythology, on the cult of personality, on the idea that the Kim family are not mere mortals but chosen leaders with a sacred duty. He approaches the statue, and, as he does every morning, places his right hand over his heart and bows deeply. The gesture is captured by cameras hidden in the walls, footage that may or may not be used for internal propaganda. Everything is recorded, everything is documented. His life is not his own. It belongs to the state, to the people, to the narrative. After the bow, he turns left into his official office, a room that contrasts sharply with the opulence of the Great Hall. Here, the decor is purposefully modest: a large desk, comfortable chairs, bookshelves lined with policy documents and historical texts, and a single window overlooking the gardens. On his desk sits a computer with access to the state intranet, several phones with different levels of security clearance, and a stack of reports that seems to regenerate daily no matter how many he reviews. His senior advisors are already waiting. General Pak, the grizzled military leader whose loyalty is assured through decades of family connection. Minister Ri, the economic advisor who faces the impossible task of managing an economy crippled by sanctions. And Ambassador Kim, the smooth-talking diplomat who serves as the nation's face to the outside world. They stand as he enters, bowing in unison. Sit, Kim Jong-un commands, moving behind his desk. General Pak, your report on the Southwestern Military District exercises. General Pak steps forward, opening a leather folder containing detailed maps and statistics. Supreme Leader, the exercises were conducted with complete success. Our forces demonstrated exceptional readiness and enthusiasm. The new artillery placements are operational and exceed projected capabilities. Kim Jong-un listens, but he's also reading between the lines, a skill honed over years of leadership. Exceptional enthusiasm likely means the soldiers were adequately fed that day and didn't desert. Exceed projected capabilities probably means they functioned as intended, not that they're actually superior to enemy forces. The art of North Korean bureaucracy is learning to decode the mandatory exaguments and the ammunition supplies. Kim Jong-un asks, focusing on the practical detail, his general conveniently omitted. A slight hesitation. Adequate for the exercises. Supreme Leader. However, for sustained operations, we would require more resources. Yes, General, you always require more resources. Kim Jong-un's tone is not unkind, merely stating a fact. Every minister, every general, every official comes to him asking for more money, more food, more equipment, all drawing from the same limited pool. Minister Ri, perhaps you can explain to the general where these additional resources might materialize from. Minister Ri shifts uncomfortably in his seat. He's a technocrat, educated in economics at Kim Il-sung University, and he understands the impossible mathematics of their situation better than anyone. Supreme Leader, our current economic projections show modest growth in the domestic manufacturing sector, primarily due to the new factory initiatives in Pyongyang. However, the international sanctions continue to severely limit our trade capacity. The Chinese have been less cooperative than in previous years, and our ability to generate foreign currency through traditional channels has been significantly impacted. Traditional channels, Kim Jong-un repeats, allowing a slight smile. Everyone in the room knows that traditional channels is code for everything, from weapons sales to cybercrime to the export of North Korean laborers. Give me actual numbers. Minister. No euphemisms. Minister re-swallows, consulting his notes. Our foreign currency reserves are approximately 40% below where they were this time last year. Domestic food production is projected to meet 75% of basic needs, assuming favorable weather conditions. The gap will need to be filled through imports or adjustments to distribution. Adjustments to distribution. Another euphemism, this one meaning that some people will eat less so that priority population's military party elites, Pyongyang residents can eat adequately. Kim Jong-un feels the familiar knot in his stomach. These decisions, made in the abstract comfort of his office, translate to real suffering for real people. But what is the alternative? Lose the support of the military and face a coup. Allow Pyongyang to starve and risk popular uprising. The calculations are brutal, the options limited. What about the new economic zones? Kim Jong-un asks. The special development areas near the Chinese border, progress is slower than anticipated. Supreme Leader, the Chinese investors are cautious given the international situation. However, we have successfully attracted some smaller enterprises, primarily in textiles and light manufacturing. It's a beginning, a beginning. Everything is always a beginning. Tentative steps toward an uncertain future. Kim Jong-un nods, making mental calculations. Reallocate 5% of the military budget to food imports. General Pak, your forces will need to increase efficiency to compensate. General Pak's jaw tightens, but he bows in acceptance. To argue would be to question the Supreme Leader's wisdom, a dangerous proposition. Ambassador Kim Jong-un, continues, shifting focus. Update me on the diplomatic situation. Is there any movement from the Americans? Ambassador Kim leans forward, his expression carefully neutral. Supreme Leader, our contacts indicate that the current American administration is open to dialogue, but their preconditions remain unacceptable. They continue to demand complete denuclearization before any sanctions relief. Kim Jong-un laughs, a short, bitter sound. Complete denuclearization. Of course they do. And what guarantee do we have that the moment we disarm, they won't simply invade? Look at what happened to Libya, to Iraq. The lesson of the 21st century is clear. Have nuclear weapons and survive, or disarm and be destroyed. The room falls silent. This is the central paradox of North Korean foreign policy, the logic that drives their nuclear program despite international condemnation. From Kim Jong-un's perspective, the weapons are not tools of aggression but of survival. Insurance against the fate of other small nations that trusted Western promises. Continue the diplomatic contacts, Kim Jong-un instructs, but make our position clear. Mutual respect. Phased denuclearization in exchange for concrete sanctions relief and security guarantees. No more, no less. Yes, Supreme Leader. The meeting continues for another hour. covering topics from agricultural yields to infrastructure projects to the latest developments in missile technology. Kim Jong-un participates actively, asking questions, challenging assumptions, making decisions that will affect millions of lives. This is the reality of his daily existence, not the caricature portrayed in international media, but the mundane bureaucracy of running a nation, solving problems with inadequate resources, balancing competing interests and impossible demands. As the meeting concludes and his advisors file out, Kim Jong-un remains seated at his desk, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. The weight of legacy, he thinks again, remembering the portraits in the hallway. His grandfather had revolution and founding mythology. His father had the loyalty born of decades of preparation. What does he have? Youth, education in the West, a perspective that allows him to see both the absurdities and the necessities of his system, but also the terrible knowledge that he is trapped, as much a prisoner of the system as any citizen, perhaps more so because he understands the prison walls so clearly. He stands and walks to the window, looking out at Pyongyang. Spread before him the monuments, the buildings, the carefully cultivated image of a socialist paradise. Somewhere in that city, people are living their lives, going to work, raising families, experiencing joys and sorrows just as people do everywhere. They are not the mindless automatons of Western propaganda, but neither are they free in any meaningful sense. They live in the space between mythology and reality, between what the state claims and what actually exists. And he is responsible for all of it, the glory and the suffering, the achievements and the failures. This is the weight of legacy. After the intensity of the morning briefings, Kim Jong-un needs a break, a brief respite from being the supreme leader. He signals to Secretary Choi, who immediately understands. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 hours," he instructs quietly. She raises an eyebrow slightly. 2 hours is a long break but nods professionally. "Of course, Supreme Leader, I'll inform the next appointments of the delay." Kim Jong-un exits through a side door that few people know exists, leading to a private staircase that descends 3 levels below ground. At the bottom, 2 guards stand at attention before a heavy steel door. They salute crisply as he approaches, and one quickly enters a code on the security panel. The door slides open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing what appears to be a simple storage corridor. But Kim Jong-un knows the truth. This corridor leads to his most closely guarded secret, the place where the supreme leader disappears and the man emerges. He walks 50 meters down the corridor, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls, until he reaches a second door, this one requiring both a code and a fingerprint scan. He completes both security measures, and the door unlocks. Inside is a space that would shock anyone who discovered it, a fully equipped music recording studio, complete with professional-grade mixing boards, multiple keyboards, a drum set, guitars, and racks of expensive audio equipment. The walls are covered with acoustic foam panels, and concert posters from Western bands, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Eric Clapton, hang alongside Korean revolutionary music sheets in a jarring juxtaposition. This is Kim Jong-un's sanctuary, his escape, his secret life. In this room, he is not the supreme leader but simply a music enthusiast, a frustrated artist who might have pursued a very different life if fate and birth had not determined otherwise. He approaches the main keyboard, a Yamaha grand piano converted to digital, and sits on the bench. His fingers find the keys instinctively, beginning with a few scales to warm up. The sound that emerges is clean, pure, filling the room with melody. He learned to play as a child. During his years in Switzerland, his guardian at the time, a loyal North Korean operative posing as his father, had reluctantly agreed to piano lessons after Jong-un had begged persistently. Those lessons had become the highlight of his week. A few hours where he could lose himself in music, forgetting about the destiny that awaited him. His teacher, an elderly Swiss woman named Mrs. Keller, had no idea who her student really was. To her, he was just another expatriate child, perhaps a bit spoiled, certainly mysterious, but talented. She had encouraged his playing, pushed him to master difficult pieces, praised his emotional interpretation. She had once told him, "You play with such feeling. Music like this comes from the soul." If only she knew the irony of those words, that the soul she perceived in his playing was the only free part of him, the only space where he could express emotions that were otherwise strictly controlled and channeled for political purposes. Kim Jong-un begins playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece he's practiced hundreds of times but never mastered to his satisfaction. The music flows from his fingers, melancholic and beautiful, filling the empty studio. He closes his eyes, letting the music transport him away from North Korea, away from responsibility, away from everything. For these moments, he is not Kim Jong-un, Supreme Leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He is simply a man playing piano in a soundproof room, expressing through music all the emotions he can never show in public: doubt, fear, loneliness, longing for a different life. The piece concludes, and he sits in silence for a moment, hands resting on the keys. Then he stands and moves to the recording equipment. Along one wall are shelves containing hundreds of recordings mixtapes he's made over the years, compositions he's attempted, covers of Western songs that he could never publicly admit to enjoying. He selects a blank recording medium and boots up the digital audio workstation on the computer. For the next hour, he works on a composition he started months ago, a piece that blends traditional Korean instrumentation with modern electronic elements. It's an unusual combination, one that mirrors his own internal contradictions, the traditional and the modern, the Eastern and the Western, the public persona and the private reality. He layers sounds carefully, a Hegium traditional Korean string instrument sample over an electronic beat, adding subtle piano harmonies, building complexity. The work is meticulous, requiring complete focus, and that's exactly what he needs to focus on: something creative rather than destructive, something beautiful rather than political. As he works, his mind wanders to the surreal nature of his situation. Here he is, a dictator who appears on state television inspecting military equipment and delivering stern proclamations about national sovereignty, secretly producing electronic music in an underground bunker. The absurdity is not lost on him. If this ever became public, what would people think? Would it humanize him, or simply add another bizarre detail to the already strange narrative of North Korean leadership? Probably the latter, he concludes. In the eyes of the world, North Korean leaders are not permitted to be complex, multidimensional humans. They must be simple villains, cartoon characters, easily digestible for news consumption. The reality that he loves music, that he feels conflicted about his role, that he experiences doubt and uncertainty would be too complicated for the narrative. His recording session is interrupted by a soft knock on the door, the prearranged signal that his time is nearly up. He saves his work, carefully labeling the file with a nondescript name that wouldn't attract attention if someone somehow accessed his computer, though the security measures make that virtually impossible. He takes a moment to look around the studio, this room that represents his truest self, before heading back to the door. The transformation begins even before he exits. His posture straightens, his expression firms, the vulnerable artist receding as the authoritative leader emerges. By the time the door opens, the metamorphosis is complete. Secretary Choi is waiting with her tablet. Supreme Leader, the Chinese delegation has arrived early. They're waiting in the reception hall. Kim Jong-un nods, his brief escape already feeling like a distant dream. Very well, let's not keep our guests waiting. As they walk back through the corridors toward the public areas of the complex, Kim Jong-un's mind is already shifting gears, preparing for the diplomatic ballet ahead. But somewhere in the back of his consciousness, the melody of his unfinished composition continues to play, a quiet reminder of the person he might have been in a different life. The reception hall where the Chinese delegation waits is a masterpiece of carefully calculated design. Everything in this room sends a message. The portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il watching from positions of prominence. The display cases containing gifts from various nations acknowledging North Korean sovereignty. The expensive furniture that demonstrates the nation's prosperity regardless of what foreign media reports might claim. Kim Jong-un enters with practiced confidence, his arms extended in welcome. Ambassador Jung, you honor us with your presence. The delegation stands, and Ambassador Jung Weiming, a career diplomat in his 60s with the smooth manners of someone who has navigated countless international crises, bows respectfully. Supreme Leader, the honor is ours. I bring warm greetings from Chairman Xi and the sincere friendship of the Chinese people. The formal pleasantries continue for several minutes, a ritualized dance that both parties know well. China is North Korea's most important ally, really its only significant ally, and the relationship is complex, sometimes patron and client, sometimes uneasy partners, always bound by shared ideology and strategic interests. They settle into comfortable chairs arranged in a semicircle, tea already poured by efficient staff who then disappear like ghosts. Kim Jong-un knows that despite the friendly words, this meeting will be delicate. Chinese patience with North Korea's nuclear program has worn thin, and recent sanctions have strained even their relationship. Ambassador Jung Kim Jong-un begins after the tea ritual. I trust your journey was comfortable. Very much so. Supreme Leader, your country's infrastructure continues to improve impressively. A polite fiction, the drive from the airport was likely bumpy and revealed more poverty than prosperity, but necessary for diplomatic courtesy. Kim Jong-un smiles, acknowledging the game. We do what we can with limited resources. Speaking of which, I understand there are some concerns from Beijing regarding our recent missile tests. Jung's expression doesn't change, but there's a slight tension in his shoulders. The Chinese government understands your nation's security concerns. However, there is also the matter of regional stability and the international reaction to such demonstrations. Regional stability, Kim Jong-un repeats thoughtfully, an interesting phrase. Tell me, Ambassador, does regional stability include the joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States? The bomber flights along our border, The constant rhetoric about regime change. The supreme leader makes valid points. Zhang concedes carefully. However, the nuclear issue complicates your diplomatic position. It provides your enemies with justification for their actions. This is the heart of the matter, the perpetual argument. Kim Jong-un leans forward slightly. Ambassador Zhang, let me speak frankly. The nuclear weapons are not going away. They are our guarantee of survival. I have seen what happens to nations that disarm in good faith. We will not make that mistake. Zhang sighs internally. Kim Jong-un can see it in his eyes, even if his face remains impassive. They've had this conversation before, in various forms. The supreme leader must understand that China's ability to shield North Korea from international pressure has limits. The sanctions are affecting our bilateral trade, and there are elements within our government who question whether the strategic relationship remains beneficial, an implicit threat, delivered with diplomatic courtesy. Kim Jong-un appreciates the honesty even as he calculates his response. China is essential, but he cannot appear weak or overly dependent. I appreciate your candor, Ambassador. Let me offer equal honesty. North Korea will not become a Chinese satellite state. We value our independence highly. However, we also recognize the importance of our friendship and are willing to show flexibility in certain areas. What kind of flexibility does the supreme leader envision? Kim Jong-un has prepared for this question, having discussed options with his advisors earlier. A temporary pause in missile testing, perhaps 6 months. During this time, we could engage in preliminary diplomatic discussions with concerned parties. Not negotiations on denuclearization, that is not on the table, but discussions on reducing tensions, establishing communication channels, perhaps some humanitarian cooperation. Zhang considers this, clearly calculating how such an offer would be received in Beijing, and in exchange for this pause. Relaxation of certain sanctions, particularly those affecting food and medicine imports. Economic cooperation agreements, perhaps some Chinese investment in our special economic zones. And most importantly, clear public support from Beijing for our right to self-defense. The supreme leader drives a hard bargain. I drive a fair bargain, Ambassador. One that recognizes the interests of both our nations. The negotiation continues for another hour. A careful dance of offers and counteroffers, implicit threats and explicit compromises. This is the reality of international relations at this level, not the dramatic confrontations portrayed in media. But patient, calculated discussions where every word is weighed for multiple meanings. Eventually, they reach a tentative agreement. North Korea will pause missile testing for 4 months. China will quietly work to ease some humanitarian sanctions and increase economic cooperation, and both sides will continue diplomatic dialogue. It's not a solution, but it's a temporary easing of tensions, which is the best either side can hope for in the current circumstances. As the meeting concludes and the delegation prepares to leave, Ambassador Zhang approaches Kim Jong-un privately. Supreme Leader, if I may speak off the record. Kim Jong-un nods, curious. The two men step slightly away from the others. My government wanted me to convey something informally, Zhang says quietly. There are those in Beijing who believe that your nuclear program, while understandable from your perspective, has become a liability not just for you, but for the entire region. They wonder if there might be alternative security guarantees that could achieve your goals without the weapons. Kim Jong-un studies the ambassador carefully. Alternative security guarantees, such as a formal alliance treaty with China. Perhaps clear binding security assurances, economic integration that would make any attack on North Korea an attack on Chinese interests. It's an interesting offer, one that Kim Jong-un has anticipated. It would provide security, but at the cost of genuine independence. North Korea would become effectively a Chinese protectorate. I appreciate the suggestion, Ambassador. However, the lesson of history is clear. The only security guarantee that cannot be revoked is one's own strength. We will retain our weapons. Zhang nods, unsurprised. I expected as much. But I was obligated to present the option, and you have done your duty honorably, Ambassador. Please convey my regards to Chairman Xi and my hope for continued friendship between our nations. They exchange final pleasantries, and the Chinese delegation departs. Kim Jong-un watches their convoy leave from the window, then turns to Secretary Choi. Your assessment. She considers carefully before responding. They're growing tired of us, Supreme Leader. The offer of an alliance was likely genuine, but accepting would mean surrendering our independence. You made the correct decision. Did I? Kim Jong-un asks, more to himself than to her. Or did I just choose pride over pragmatism? You chose sovereignty over dependence. That is what your grandfather would have done. Perhaps, Kim Jong-un thinks, but his grandfather had never faced quite this level of international isolation, never had to balance on such a precarious edge. As he returns to his office, Kim Jong-un reflects on the surreal nature of his existence. To the world, he is a dangerous dictator, unpredictable and irrational. To his people, he is the supreme leader, infallible and all-knowing. To the Chinese, He is a sometimes useful, sometimes troublesome client-state leader, but to himself, he is simply a man trying to navigate impossible circumstances, making decisions with incomplete information, hoping that his choices will preserve his nation and his own survival. The diplomatic dance continues, as it always does, one careful step after another. Lunch is a private affair today, one that Kim Jong-un approaches with mixed emotions. His wife, Ru, and their 3 children will be joining him, a rare occurrence given the security protocols and the general practice of keeping his family life extremely private. The private family dining room is warm and inviting, decorated not with revolutionary propaganda, but with children's artwork and family photos. Here, the carefully constructed image of the supreme leader gives way to something more human: a father, a husband, a family man navigating the complexities of relationships under extraordinary circumstances. Ru arrives first, elegant in a simple dress that is nonetheless clearly expensive, her hair perfectly styled. She was a singer when they met, performing with a state orchestra, and she still carries herself with the poise of a performer. Their marriage was reportedly a love match, unusual for a family where political considerations typically outweigh personal preferences. Though the truth is more nuanced than either pure love or pure arrangement. Jong-un, she greets him, using his personal name rather than any formal title. In this room, at least, they have agreed to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Ru, he kisses her cheek, a gesture of affection that would never be photographed or publicized. North Korean propaganda prefers to portray him as a paternal leader to the nation rather than a man with romantic attachments. Their children enter next. The oldest, a daughter of 10, whose name has never been publicly confirmed, followed by 2 younger children, a boy and another daughter. They are scrubbed clean, dressed nicely but not ostentatiously, looking like any other children of privilege except for the enormous weight of their lineage. Papa, the youngest, squeals, running to him with the unselfconscious affection of a 5-year-old who doesn't yet fully understand what her father represents to the world. Kim Jong-un scoops her up, swinging her in a circle before setting her down. For a moment, he is not the supreme leader but simply a father delighting in his child's joy. They settle at the table, and the meal is served a mixture of Korean and international cuisine, prepared to accommodate both adult and children's tastes. The conversation begins with the mundane, the children's studies, a new painting the oldest has completed, a funny incident at their private school. The children attend a special facility exclusively for the children of the highest elite, where they are educated to the highest international standards, while being carefully insulated from any information that might complicate their understanding of their nation's reality. Papa, my teacher said that you are the most important person in the world, his oldest daughter says with the innocent seriousness of childhood. Is that true? Kim Jong-un exchanges a glance with Ru. How to answer? The propaganda his children are fed is necessary to their safety and his position, but he sometimes wonders what it does to them psychologically to be raised in such an artificially constructed reality. Your teacher is correct that I have important responsibilities, he says carefully, but most important is a complicated idea. I am important to our country, but there are many important people in the world, each important in different ways. But you're more important than the American president, right? His son asks eagerly. Because teacher said, eat your vegetables. Ru interrupts smoothly, redirecting the conversation. She understands these moments when political education intrudes on family time, and she has become skilled at navigating them. The meal continues with lighter topics, but Kim Jong-un's mind is partially elsewhere, thinking about the impossible task of raising children in his position. They are being groomed to understand their special status, to accept the mythology of the Kim family's leadership, but at what cost to their development as individuals? His own childhood was complicated and rough-raised, partially in North Korea, partially abroad, always aware that he was different, special, destined for something extraordinary. But at least he had experienced some normalcy during his time in Switzerland, had gone to public school, had made friends who didn't know his true identity. His children have no such escape. Their entire world is carefully constructed, filtered, and controlled. After the main course, as dessert is being served, Ru sends the children to play in an adjoining room, supervised by staff but out of earshot. She turns to Kim Jong-un, with the expression he knows means serious conversation. I heard about the meeting with the Chinese delegation, she says quietly. There are rumors that they're pressuring you to change course on the nuclear program. He's not surprised, she knows. Ru is far more than just a wife. She's one of his most trusted confidants, politically astute and well-informed. Rumors are correct. Beijing is growing impatient with our independence. What did you tell them? That we will not surrender our security for promises. She nods, approving. Good. We've seen what happens to leaders who trust Western guarantees. Then, more hesitantly, but I worry about the children. This path we're on, it's dangerous. What happens if there's a miscalculation? If a war starts, it's a fair question, one that haunts Kim Jong-un in his darker moments. The nuclear program is meant to prevent war through deterrence, but deterrence only works if both sides act rationally, and rationality can be in short supply in international crises. I have contingency plans, he says, which is true but incomplete. The contingency plans range from bunker systems designed to survive nuclear strikes to escape routes that could theoretically get his family to safety in China or Russia. But these are last resorts, desperate measures for worst-case scenarios. The best protection is strength. As long as we maintain our weapons, no one will attack us directly. You sound very confident. I have to be confident. Doubt is a luxury I cannot afford. Risalru reaches across the table, taking his hand a gesture of intimacy and support. I know the burden you carry. I just want you to remember that you're not just the supreme leader, you're also a father and a husband. These children need you to survive, not just for the nation, but for them. I know, he says softly. I think about that every day. The moment is broken by their youngest daughter running back into the room, clutching a drawing she wants to show her father. Kim Jong-un examines it seriously, a child's interpretation of their house. With stick figures representing the family, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. It's beautiful, he tells her honestly. We should have it framed. Her delighted smile is uncomplicated, pure. He wishes, not for the first time, that he could preserve this innocence, could prevent the inevitable day when she will fully understand what her last name means, the responsibilities and dangers it carries. The family lunch concludes with more warmth than it began, and as they prepare to part ways, the children returning to their studies, Risalru to her own schedule of carefully orchestrated public appearances, Kim Jong-un feels the familiar duality of his existence. He is both supremely powerful and utterly trapped. Able to command a nation but unable to give his children a normal childhood, capable of launching missiles but helpless to protect his family from the consequences of his choices. As they leave, Risalru pauses at the door. Remember, she says quietly, you're human. Don't let them turn you into just a symbol. He nods, appreciating her reminder even as he knows it's already too late. He became a symbol the moment his father died and he assumed power. The man and the myth are inextricably linked now, two sides of the same complex existence. But in moments like these, in the privacy of family, he can at least remember which side is real. The afternoon brings a return to public duties. An inspection tour of a newly constructed electronics factory on the outskirts of Pyongyang. These tours are a staple of Kim Jong-un's leadership, carefully staged events that serve multiple purposes, demonstrating his engaged management style, providing propaganda footage for state media, and actually addressing some practical concerns about production and efficiency. The motorcade that transports him is a impressive display of security. Multiple armored vehicles, decoy cars, motorcycle outriders, and a mobile command center capable of maintaining communication even in a crisis. The route has been secured hours in advance. Every building along the way inspected, every potential threat assessed and neutralized. They arrive at the factory to find it in pristine condition. Workers lined up in perfect formation wearing matching clean uniforms. Kim Jong-un has been on enough of these tours to know the reality. The factory was probably cleaned for weeks in preparation, the workers carefully selected for their political reliability and presentability, and the production line that will be demonstrated has been practiced repeatedly to ensure flawless performance. Nevertheless, the ritual must be observed. He exits the vehicle to find the factory manager, a nervous man in his 50s named Choi, bowing so deeply that his forehead nearly touches his knees. Supreme Leader, you honor us with your presence. Our humble factory is unworthy of your attention, but we are grateful beyond measure that you have chosen to visit us. The formulaic obsequiousness is expected, but Kim Jong-un finds it tiresome. He prefers the rare officials who can speak naturally. Though such behavior can be dangerous, too much familiarity might be interpreted as disrespect by others watching. Manager Choi, please stand up. I am here to see your work, not to receive excessive flattery. Show me the facility. Relief flickers across Choi's face. The Supreme Leader is in a reasonable mood and he gestures toward the factory entrance. Of course, Supreme Leader, if you will follow me, I will show you our production line for tablet computers, manufactured entirely with domestic components and technology. The claim about entirely domestic components is certainly an exaggeration, likely Chinese parts with North Korean assembly, but Kim Jong-un doesn't challenge it publicly. They enter the factory floor, and immediately a small army of photographers and videographers begins documenting every moment. The footage will appear on state television tonight, the Supreme Leader carefully examining products, offering guidance to grateful workers, demonstrating his brilliant leadership and technical expertise. The production line is indeed impressive, at least compared to what existed 5 years ago. Workers assemble tablet computers with reasonable efficiency, and the quality control station shows devices that actually function. North Korea has made genuine strides in electronics manufacturing, though they remain years behind international standards. Kim Jong-un picks up one of the completed tablets, turning it over in his hands. It's heavier than an equivalent foreign product. The screen resolution is lower, but it works. He powers it on and navigates through the interface, a custom operating system based on Linux but heavily modified and controlled. What is the production capacity? He asks. We can produce 500 units per day, Supreme Leader, with our current workforce and resources. However, if we could obtain additional resources, Kim Jong-un interrupts. Everyone needs additional resources. Tell me instead, what is preventing you from reaching 1,000 units per day with existing resources? Choi hesitates, clearly not expecting this line of questioning. Well, Supreme Leader, the bottleneck is primarily at the circuit board assembly stage. We have only 3 qualified technicians, and then train more technicians. How long does training take? Approximately 3 months for basic competency, Supreme Leader. Then begin training immediately. Select your most promising workers and create a training program. I will have Minister reallocate funds for this purpose. Choi looks stunned. He clearly expected a ceremonial visit, not actual problems. Yes, Supreme Leader, we will implement this immediately. The tour continues through various sections of the factory. Kim Jong-un asks practical questions about supply chains, quality control, worker morale. He's genuinely interested in making the factory more efficient, partly because he believes in development and modernization, but also because every successful domestic production facility reduces dependence on imports and sanctions circumvention. At the packaging station, he pauses to speak with a young worker, a woman in her 20s named Kim Soo-jin. She stands, rigidly, terrified, as the Supreme Leader approaches her station. Comrade Kim Soo-jin, he says, reading her name badge, how long have you worked here? 6 months, Supreme Leader, she manages to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you enjoy your work? A complicated question, does she dare complain? But also, too much enthusiasm might seem false. I am honored to contribute to our nation's development. Supreme Leader, the work is challenging but meaningful. A safe answer, carefully phrased. Kim Jong-un nods. And you are able to support your family on your salary? Yes, Supreme Leader, my wages allow me to care for my mother and younger brother. We are grateful for the opportunity. He notices that her hands are slightly scarred, burn marks from soldering work. A detail the tour organizers probably hoped he wouldn't notice. Your hands show dedication to your work, he says, surprising everyone by acknowledging the injury. Make sure the factory has proper safety equipment. People are our most valuable resource. Yes, Supreme Leader. Manager Choi practically shouts. We will improve safety measures immediately. The interaction is brief but will be remembered and discussed. The Supreme Leader noticed a worker's injuries and called for better safety, proof of his benevolent leadership and concern for the people. Never mind that safety equipment should have been standard from the beginning, or that Soo-jin's injuries represent a failure of management. The narrative will be shaped to fit the mythology. As the tour concludes, Kim Jong-un delivers impromptu remarks to the assembled workers, who listen with rapt attention, whether genuine or performed. It's impossible to say. Comrades, what I have seen here today fills me with pride. You are building not just tablet computers, but our nation's future. Every device you produce represents our self-reliance, our refusal to be dependent on others. The imperialists want to see us fail, want to believe that we cannot innovate and produce. You prove them wrong every day. The workers applaud enthusiastically. But we must not become complacent. These tablets are good, but they must become great. Our quality must improve, our efficiency must increase. I challenge you to double your production within 6 months. If you succeed, I will personally ensure that this factory receives priority access to resources and that every worker receives a bonus. The applause intensifies. Promising a bonus costs him little. The actual value in North Korean currency will be modest, but the gesture matters. The sense that the Supreme Leader personally cares about their success. He returns to his motorcade, waving to the workers who have been assembled to see him off. As the vehicles pull away, he can see them through the tinted windows, still waving, still maintaining their poses of enthusiastic loyalty until the motorcade is completely out of sight. Secretary Choi, sitting across from him in the vehicle, makes notes on her tablet. That went well, Supreme Leader. The footage will be excellent for tonight's news broadcast. Did it go well? Kim Jong-un asks. Or did we just perpetuate a comfortable fiction? That factory has capacity and quality issues that won't be solved by my visit or inspirational words. Perhaps not immediately, Supreme Leader, but your intervention, the training program, the safety equipment, the production challenges may actually make a difference. May make a difference, he repeats. Everything is may, and perhaps in this country. We are always on the verge of great things, perpetually about to turn the corner into prosperity, but somehow never quite arriving. Secretary Choi is silent, recognizing one of his reflective moods. These moments of doubt are rare and never to be acknowledged by anyone else. They ride in silence, back toward central Pyongyang, the supreme leader gazing out at the city he rules but cannot truly change, at least not as quickly or comprehensively as he sometimes imagines in his more ambitious moments. Evening descends on Pyongyang, and with it comes the most sensitive part of Kim Jong-un's daily routine, the intelligence briefing. While his morning meetings deal with policy and administration, his evening meetings focus on security, both internal and external. The threats to his regime are numerous and varied, requiring constant vigilance and sometimes ruthless responses. The briefing takes place in a secure room deep within the palace complex, shielded from electronic surveillance and accessible only to a handful of the most trusted officials. Present tonight are General Sun, the head of the State Security Department, Colonel Kang, who leads the Foreign Intelligence Division, and Minister Yoon, who oversees counterintelligence and internal monitoring. They gather around a table covered with classified documents, each marked with various security designations. General Sun speaks first, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of decades in the security services. Supreme Leader, we have identified 3 separate plots against the regime this month. The first involved mid-level military officers in the 4th Corps, who were allegedly discussing the possibility of a coup. We have arrested 17 individuals, and interrogations are ongoing. Kim Jong-un listens without visible emotion, though internally he feels the familiar cold knot of fear. Coup plots are his greatest nightmare, the most direct threat to his survival. What was their motivation? Were they ideologically opposed, or was this opportunistic? The interrogations suggest a combination. Supreme Leader, some expressed discomfort with recent policy directions, particularly the economic hardships affecting military families. Others appear to have been motivated by personal ambition, believing that a change in leadership might advance their careers. And the extent of the conspiracy. Were these isolated malcontents, or is there a broader network? We believe we have identified all participants in this particular plot, Supreme Leader. However, the underlying grievances, food shortages, limited resources for military families, these are systemic issues that may inspire future attempts. Kim Jong-un nods slowly. Execute the ringleaders. The others, depending on their level of involvement and the information they provide, can be sent to labor camps or dismissed from service. Make sure the executions are publicized within the military, not to the general public, but ensure that officers understand the consequences of disloyalty. Yes, Supreme Leader, the cold calculus of dictatorship, punish severely to deter others, but not so broadly that you create additional enemies. 17 arrests, perhaps 3 or 4 executions, the rest imprisoned or marginalized. And somewhere, families will mourn, children will grow up without fathers, wives will become widows. But the alternative, showing mercy that might be interpreted as weakness, could inspire more plots, more threats. This is the price of survival at the top. Colonel Kang presents his report next, this one focused on external intelligence. Supreme Leader, our sources indicate that the American intelligence services have intensified their collection efforts against us. We've detected increased electronic surveillance, satellite overflights, and attempts to recruit defectors with access to sensitive programs. What specific programs are they targeting? Primarily, the missile and nuclear facilities. Supreme Leader, they want to understand our capabilities and launch readiness. There's also significant interest in your personal security arrangements and schedule. Kim Jong-un considers this. The Americans always want more intelligence. It's their nature, as a superpower, to seek complete information dominance. But increased intensity suggests they may be preparing for something, perhaps military options being developed as contingencies. In our defensive measures, we've implemented additional operational security protocols. Supreme Leader, key facilities have been relocated or camouflaged, and we've identified and neutralized to recruitment attempts. However, we must acknowledge that American technical capabilities are superior to ours. They can likely track more than we would prefer. Honest assessment, which Kim Jong-un appreciates. Continue countermeasures. And Colonel, I want you to personally oversee a disinformation campaign. Feed them intelligence that suggests our capabilities are more advanced than they actually are. Let them worry about threats that don't exist while we work on real developments. A slight smile crosses Kang's face. Yes, Supreme Leader, we have some creative possibilities along those lines. Minister Yoon's report focuses on internal security and social monitoring. Supreme Leader, there has been an increase in illegal media consumption, particularly foreign films and television programs smuggled from China. We've conducted raids in several districts, confiscating materials and arresting distributors. This is a perpetual problem. North Korean citizens. Growing curiosity about the outside world, fueled by illicit access to foreign media. It's dangerous because it undermines the carefully constructed narrative about North Korean superiority and foreign corruption. What's being watched? Kim Jong-un asks. Primarily South Korean dramas and American films. Supreme Leader, The content portrays a lifestyle of wealth and freedom that contrasts sharply with our people's reality. We're concerned about the ideological contamination, particularly among young people. Kim Jong-un feels a stab of hypocrisy. He himself consumes foreign media, reads international news, enjoys Western music, but he recognizes the difference. He has the context and education to consume such material critically, understanding it as entertainment or information rather than aspiration. The average citizen lacks that framework and might simply see material prosperity and desire it, undermining their commitment to the North Korean system. Increase penalties for distribution, but be measured in how you handle simple consumers. We don't want to create martyrs or excessive resentment. Focus on cutting off supply rather than punishing demand. Yes, Supreme Leader. The briefing continues for another hour, covering topics from border security to economic espionage to monitoring of potentially disloyal elite families. Each report reveals another aspect of the vast security apparatus required to maintain his regime. The surveillance, the informants, the careful watching and listening and assessing of threats both real and imagined. As the meeting concludes and his security chiefs depart, Kim Jong-un remains seated, suddenly exhausted. This is the reality that visitors never see. The burden that propaganda never mentions, the constant paranoia, the knowledge that trust is a luxury he cannot afford, the awareness that somewhere in his country, someone is probably plotting against him right now. He thinks about the 17 arrested officers. They had families, careers, lives. Now they face execution or imprisonment because they expressed doubts or harbored ambitions. Is this justice, or simply necessity? He's long since stopped trying to answer such questions definitively. In the world he inhabits, morality is complicated by survival, and philosophical certitude is a luxury for those not responsible for maintaining a regime. Secretary Choi enters quietly. Supreme Leader, you have one more appointment this evening. The Economic Planning Committee is waiting with next year's budget proposals. He wants to refuse, to be done with official duties for the day. But the work never truly ends, and the budget is too important to postpone. Very well. Give me 5 minutes, then show them in. She nods and withdraws. Kim Jong-un stands and walks to the window, looking out at Pyongyang's evening lights. The city glows, the showcase monuments illuminated, presenting an image of prosperity and power. But he knows the truth behind the lights. The electricity rationing in residential areas, the factories running at partial capacity, the careful management of scarce resources to maintain the illusion of abundance in the capital while the countryside makes do with far less. He rules a nation built on contradictions, where propaganda and reality exist in parallel, both true in their own way, yet fundamentally incompatible. And he is the central contradiction, the absolute ruler who is himself ruled by circumstances, the supreme leader who leads within carefully constrained boundaries. The man with unlimited power, who is perhaps the least free person in his entire nation. The 5 minutes expire, and he returns to his desk as the Economic Planning Committee enters, ready to debate budget allocations that will never be adequate, to make impossible choices about which needs to prioritize and which to defer, to continue the endless struggle of governing a country that exists on the margins of the international system. This is his evening report, his nightly reminder of all the ways his rule could fail, all the threats he must manage, all the compromises he must make, and tomorrow, he will wake up and do it all again. Late evening brings a rare opportunity for Kim Jong-un to indulge one of his more unusual passions, his private collection. After the budget meeting concludes 3 hours of debating allocations that will never satisfy everyone, he dismisses his staff and makes his way to another secure room, this one housing something that would surprise most people who think they know him. The room is climate-controlled, humidity carefully regulated, and filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves. But instead of weapons or gold or revolutionary memorabilia, the shelves contain thousands of books, films, and music albums from around the world. This is Kim Jong-un's private library, a collection he's been building since his youth, a window to the outside world that he both fears and envies. He walks slowly along the shelves, running his fingers across the spines. Here are first editions of classic literature, Orwell's 1984, the irony is not lost on him, Tolstoy's War and Peace, Shakespeare's complete works. There are modern bestsellers, thrillers, science fiction, even some romance novels acquired more for completeness than personal interest. The film collection is similarly diverse. Classic Hollywood cinema sits alongside French New Wave, Japanese anime, next to Korean art films. He has the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, collected systematically despite the ideological contradiction of celebrating American superheroes. There are Kubrick films, Tarantino, and an extensive collection of basketball documentaries. His love of the sport is well known, but the depth of his collection would surprise even his closest advisors. Tonight, Kim Jong-un is drawn to the music section. He pulls out a vinyl record. Yes, he has a collection of actual vinyl pressed albums that have been carefully acquired through various channels over the years. He selects Pink Floyd's The Wall, an album that has always resonated with him for reasons he doesn't fully articulate even to himself. He places the record on a high-end turntable, imported piece by piece and assembled by a technician who had no idea what he was helping build. The needle drops, and the opening tracks of The Wall fill the room. Kim Jong-un settles into a comfortable leather chair, closes his eyes, and listens. The music is both an escape and a mirror. Pink Floyd's critique of authoritarianism, conformity, and psychological walls built to protect oneself from pain. These themes speak to him in ways that would horrify both his supporters and his critics if they knew. He is both the tyrant and the victim in these songs, both the builder of walls and the one trapped behind them. Is there really so much difference? As another brick in the wall plays with its famous lyrics, criticizing thought control in education, Kim Jong-un can't help but reflect on the North Korean education system, the mandatory political instruction, the rote memorization of Kim family mythology, the complete absence of critical thinking skills. He has benefited from this system, depends on it for maintaining control, yet he also recognizes its limitations. A population educated only in propaganda is a weak population, unable to innovate, adapt, or compete globally. But a population educated to think critically is a dangerous population, potentially questioning the very foundations of his rule. Another impossible balance to strike. The album continues, and his mind wanders to his collection's significance. These books, these films, this music, they represent everything his regime officially opposes. Western decadence, capitalist culture, ideological pollution. If discovered by the wrong people, this collection could be used against him, evidence that the supreme leader himself is contaminated by foreign influence. Yet he maintains it, even expands it, because these artifacts connect him to a broader human culture that transcends politics and borders. In this room, he is not North Korean or Western, not communist or capitalist, not supreme leader or citizen. He is simply a person engaging with human creativity in its various forms. Between tracks, he stands and examines another shelf, this one containing books on philosophy and political theory. Here is Marx and Engels, of course, required reading for any communist leader. But also Machiavelli's The Prince, which he has read more times than he can count, finding new relevance with each reading. Plato's Republic with its philosopher kings and noble lies. Hobbes on the necessity of strong central authority to prevent chaos. He has built his own eclectic political philosophy from these sources, a pragmatic blend that justifies his rule while acknowledging its complexities. His hand falls on a slim volume, The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. He pulls it from the shelf and flips through pages he has highlighted and annotated. Camus' meditation on absurdity and meaning in a meaningless universe has always struck him as particularly relevant to his situation. He is Sisyphus, endlessly pushing the boulder of state up the mountain, knowing that it will roll back down, that the struggle is perpetual and ultimately futile, yet continuing anyway because the struggle itself is the point. Camus concludes that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding meaning in the struggle rather than the goal. Kim Jong-un is not sure he agrees, but he appreciates the attempt at optimism. The album ends, and he carefully returns the vinyl to its sleeve before selecting another. Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, a jazz masterpiece that represents a completely different mood. As the first notes of So What begin, he pours himself a glass of cognac French expensive, another small luxury that would seem hypocritical to outside observers, but which he justifies as one of the few perks of his impossible position. He returns to his chair and sips the cognac, letting the smooth jazz wash over him. This room, these moments, are perhaps the most honest parts of his life. Here, he doesn't have to perform, doesn't have to maintain the image of the supreme leader. He can admit to doubts, acknowledge contradictions, engage with ideas that would be dangerous anywhere else in North Korea. The collection has become a kind of journal, physical objects that represent different phases of his life and leadership. That copy of 1984 was acquired shortly after he assumed power, when he was grappling with the surveillance state he had inherited, and the question of how much control was necessary versus excessive. The basketball documentaries came later, during a period when he was trying to soften his international image, hoping that showcasing his love of sport might humanize him to Western audiences. The philosophy books are more recent, acquired as he wrestles with questions of legacy and meaning. As midnight approaches, Kim Jong-un knows he should sleep. Tomorrow will bring another round of meetings, decisions, performances. But he lingers in the collection room a bit longer, reluctant to return to the world outside where he must be the supreme leader rather than simply a man who likes music and books. Finally, he stands, returns the Miles Davis album to its place, and takes one last look around the room. My secret rebellion, he murmurs to himself, though whether he means the collection itself or the private thoughts it inspires is unclear. He exits the room, and the heavy door locks behind him with a definitive click. the supreme leader emerges from his sanctuary, ready to resume his role. The collection packed away both physically and mentally until the next opportunity for brief escape. Kim Jong-un is preparing for bed when the emergency call comes. His secure phone, one that only rings for genuine crisis, buzzes insistently at 1:47 a.m. He answers immediately, sleep evaporating as adrenaline kicks in. Supreme Leader, this is General Sun. We have a situation at the Yongbyon nuclear facility. There's been an incident. Kim Jong-un is already moving toward his clothes. The phone pressed to his ear. What kind of incident? Be specific. An explosion. Supreme Leader, not nuclear. We've confirmed that radiation levels remain normal, but there has been significant damage to one of the cooling systems. Cause is currently unknown. Casualties. For workers confirmed injured, 2 critically. The facility has been evacuated and secured. We're convening the emergency response committee in the situation room immediately. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He dresses quickly in the same clothes he wore earlier. There's no time for the careful image management that normally defines his public appearances. Secretary Choi appears, somehow having been alerted even before he could call her, already dressed and prepared with briefing materials. They rush through the corridors, guards snapping to attention as they pass, sensing the urgency. The situation room is deep underground, designed to survive everything from nuclear strikes to conventional bombardment. By the time Kim Jong-un arrives, it's already filling with officials. General Sun, Colonel Kang, Minister Ri, and the head of the nuclear program, Dr. Han, a scientist in his 60s who looks pale and shaken. They stand as Kim Jong-un enters, but he waves them back to their seats. Sit, Dr. Han. Report. The scientist clears his throat, consulting hastily prepared notes. Supreme Leader, at approximately 1:30 a.m., there was an explosion in the cooling system for Reactor 2 at Yongbyon. The explosion was contained, and there has been no breach of the reactor core. However, the damage is extensive, and if the cooling system cannot be repaired quickly, we risk overheating. Kim Jong-un's mind races through implications. Yongbyon is critical to the nuclear weapons program, producing the plutonium essential for warheads. But more immediately, a reactor meltdown would be catastrophic, potentially a Korean Chernobyl that could affect millions. How quickly can you restore cooling? We're implementing emergency cooling measures now, Supreme Leader, but for permanent repair, we need parts that will take time to acquire. We're looking at minimum 3 to 4 weeks. Do we have that much time before overheating becomes critical? A hesitation, which tells Kim Jong-un everything. Possibly. Supreme Leader, if the emergency cooling holds and we can, I need definite answers. Dr. Han, not possibilities. Can we prevent a meltdown or not? Dr. Han looks like he might collapse. With current resources, and assuming the emergency cooling functions properly, yes, Supreme Leader. But there are risks. Kim Jong-un turns to General Sun. What was the cause? Accident, sabotage, or attack? We're investigating urgently. Supreme Leader, initial assessment suggests equipment failure. The cooling system was aging and perhaps inadequately maintained. But we cannot rule out sabotage until the investigation is complete. Equipment failure due to inadequate maintenance. In other words, the consequences of sanctions and resource limitations catching up with them. Critical infrastructure failing because they lack the resources or expertise to properly maintain it. Or possibly sabotaged by foreign intelligence services or internal enemies. Either way, a disaster. Colonel Kong, could this be an American or South Korean operation? It's possible. Supreme Leader, both have the capability for such sabotage. However, I would expect more sophisticated targeting if they had penetrated our security. This feels more like systemic failure than enemy action, though I'm not ruling anything out. Kim Jong-un makes a decision. Dr. Han, you have unlimited authority to requisition whatever resources you need for emergency cooling and repair. Colonel Kong, contact our Chinese counterparts immediately. Tell them we need specialized equipment and we need it fast. Frame it as a safety issue, emphasize the regional implications of a meltdown. Yes, Supreme Leader, General Sun, complete the sabotage investigation within 48 hours. If this was enemy action, I want to know how they penetrated our security. If it was negligence, I want to know who failed in their maintenance duties. It will be done. Supreme Leader, Minister Ri, begin preparing a cover story for international consumption. If this leaks and it might, we need a narrative that downplays the severity while explaining any unusual activity at Yongbyon. Work with Dr. Han on technically plausible language. The officials nod, scribbling notes, clearly relieved to have direction. This is Kim Jong-un's strength as a leader, the ability to make quick decisions in crisis situations, to cut through panic and focus on practical solutions. He learned this from watching his father and grandfather navigate emergencies. Understanding that a leader who appears uncertain in crisis will not remain leader for long. One more thing, Kim Jong-un adds. The injured workers ensure they receive the best possible medical care. Fly in specialists from China, if necessary. I want them to survive, both because it's right and because dead workers would complicate our narrative management. Yes, Supreme Leader, General Sun confirms. The meeting continues for another hour, working through contingency plans for various scenarios: successful cooling maintenance, partial meltdown, full catastrophe. Kim Jong-un insists on planning for even the worst cases. Over Dr. Han's protests that such scenarios are highly unlikely. Kim Jong-un has learned the hard way that unlikely events happen with disturbing regularity. As dawn approaches and the immediate crisis seems somewhat stabilized, the emergency cooling is holding. The reactor is not in immediate danger. Kim Jong-un finally allows himself a moment to breathe. He dismisses most of the officials but keeps Secretary Choi behind. Your thoughts? He asks her once they're alone. She considers carefully. The crisis seems contained for now. Supreme Leader, your response was appropriate. But this reveals a deeper problem. Our infrastructure is aging. Our ability to maintain critical facilities is compromised by sanctions, and we lack the resources to properly address these issues before they become emergencies. In other words, this will happen again. Almost certainly, Supreme Leader. Perhaps not at Yongbyon, perhaps not in the nuclear program, but somewhere in our systems, there are failures waiting to occur. We're holding together a complex modern state with inadequate resources and isolation from international supply chains. Something will always be breaking. It's a bleak assessment, but an honest one. Kim Jong-un has relied on Secretary Choi for years, precisely because she will tell him uncomfortable truths when others offer only reassurances. Then we adapt, he says finally. Increase domestic production of critical components. Create redundancies in our most essential systems. Perhaps quietly reach out to Chinese or Russian suppliers for maintenance contracts. We can't solve everything, but we can try to prevent the worst disasters. Yes, Supreme Leader. He stands, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the last several hours. One crisis averted. How many more before I can sleep? Secretary Choi almost smiles. Would you like an estimate, or would you prefer comfortable ignorance? Ignorance. I think, for once, I'd like to believe that a day might pass without emergency. They exit the Situation Room together, climbing back toward the surface. Outside, dawn is breaking over Pyongyang, the city waking to a new day, most of its residents completely unaware of the crisis that consumed their leader's night. This is another aspect of his reality: managing catastrophes that could affect millions while maintaining the appearance of calm control, shouldering burdens that his people never know exist. The Yongbyon incident will be investigated, repairs will be made, and life will continue. Perhaps it was sabotage, perhaps simple mechanical failure. Either way, it's a reminder of how precarious everything is, how quickly crisis can emerge from routine, how much of his rule consists of desperately managing one near disaster after another. As he finally returns to his quarters, Kim Jong-un knows that sleep will not come easily. His mind is too active, running through scenarios, second-guessing decisions, worrying about what might go wrong next. This is the burden of leadership at his level, the knowledge that you are responsible for everything, that failures have enormous consequences, and that there is no one else to share the weight. He lies in bed watching the sunrise through his window, listening to birds beginning their morning songs, and wonders, not for the first time, is this what his grandfather and father experienced? This constant pressure, this exhausting vigilance? Or is he somehow uniquely cursed, a modern leader trying to maintain an impossible system in an age where such systems should not survive? The questions remain unanswered as sleep finally claims him, a brief rest before the day's demands begin again. 3 weeks after the Yongbyon incident successfully managed, the cooling system repaired with Chinese assistance. The whole episode kept quiet from international media. Kim Jong-un finds himself in a rare reflective mood. It's a Sunday afternoon, and while there are always official duties, he has managed to carve out a few hours of personal time. He returns to his private music studio, the sanctuary that has become increasingly important to him as the pressures of leadership accumulate. Today, he's not here to compose or record, but simply to think, using the space as a place of honest self-assessment, away from the performance that defines his public life. He sits at the piano, not playing, just resting his hands on the keys, and allows himself to confront questions he normally suppresses. What has he actually accomplished? What will be his legacy? Is he succeeding, or simply surviving? The facts are complicated. On one hand, he has maintained his regime for over a decade now, no small feat given the predictions of imminent collapse that have accompanied his entire rule. North Korea has successfully developed nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles, achieving a deterrent capability that ensures the nation's survival against external threats. Domestic stability has been maintained, with no serious uprisings or revolutions. These are accomplishments by any measure. But at what cost? The nuclear program has brought crippling sanctions that have devastated the economy. His people live in poverty while he debates resource allocation among equally urgent needs. The mythology of the Kim family requires such elaborate maintenance that truth becomes a casualty. and he must surround himself with people who either believe the mythology or pretend to. He rules through a combination of genuine support, resigned acceptance, and fear, never entirely sure which motivates any individual's loyalty. Kim Jong-un stands and walks to the wall, where he has hung those Western concert posters. He studies them: the Beatles at Shea Stadium, Pink Floyd performing The Wall, images from a world where artists can express themselves freely, where people can gather in massive crowds without political supervision, where music is just music rather than a tool of state propaganda. He was exposed to that world during his years in Switzerland, tasted freedom and normalcy, then returned to North Korea to assume a role that makes such freedom impossible. I could have been a music producer, he says aloud to the empty room, or a basketball coach, something normal, something that didn't require calculating whether to execute people for plotting against me. But that thought is fantasy. He was born Kim Jong-un, grandson of the nation's founder, son of the supreme leader. His role was determined before his birth, his path set, regardless of personal preference. Even his exile to Switzerland was preparation, a way to give him international education while maintaining plausible deniability about his identity. He never had the option of normality. His phone buzzes, not the emergency line this time, but his personal device. A message from Ri Sol-ru. The children are asking when you'll be home. They want to show you something. He smiles despite his melancholy mood. Whatever else is true about his life, however complicated and morally ambiguous his rule might be, he has a family who loves him. That's something. At least, he types a response. On my way. Tell them to prepare their presentation. Before leaving the studio, he sits at the piano one more time and plays a simple piece, a Korean folk song his mother taught him as a child, before his father's death thrust him into power. The melody is bittersweet, filled with nostalgia for a simpler time that probably never truly existed. He plays it through twice, then stands and walks to the door. As he reaches for the handle, he pauses and looks back at the room one last time. My secret rebellion, he murmurs again, the phrase that has become his private mantra for this space. Then he exits, locking the door behind him. The walk back through the palace is longer this time, as he deliberately takes the route through the portrait gallery, past the images of his grandfather and father. He stops before each portrait, studying them with the critical eye of someone who knows the truth behind the mythology. His grandfather was brilliant in many ways, a charismatic leader who unified a nation and maintained independence between powerful neighbors. But he also created the cult of personality that has become both their strength and their trap. His father was more complex, often portrayed as eccentric or irrational, but in fact a shrewd survivor who navigated difficult circumstances and maintained the regime through the catastrophic 1990s. But he also deepened the isolation, accelerated the nuclear program that has brought such international condemnation. And now Kim Jong-un, the third generation, trying to find a path between tradition and modernity, between maintaining the system and acknowledging its unsustainability. He has tried to open the economy while maintaining political control, to engage diplomatically while keeping the nuclear deterrent, to be both the traditional supreme leader and a more modern, pragmatic head of state. The results are mixed at best. What would you do differently? He asks the portraits, not expecting answers. Did you feel this same exhaustion, this same doubt, or did you have a certainty that I lack? The portraits, of course, remain silent, their expressions frozen in the heroic poses that state artists carefully constructed. Kim Jong-un continues walking, eventually reaching the family quarters where his wife and children wait. When he enters, he is greeted with enthusiasm, his youngest running to him, his oldest presenting a carefully prepared school project about North Korean history, the approved version. Naturally, his middle child showing off a drawing. For the next hour, Kim Jong-un is not the supreme leader but simply a father, listening to his children's stories, examining their work, offering praise and gentle corrections. Ri Sol-ru watches with a small smile, appreciating these moments of domestic normalcy that are rare in their life. Later, after the children have been sent to prepare for dinner, Ri Sol-ru joins him on the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. They stand in comfortable silence for a moment before she speaks. You've been different lately, more introspective, have I? You know you have. The Yongbyon incident affected you. He nods, seeing no point in denying it. It reminded me how fragile everything is, how easily it could all fall apart, and yet it didn't fall apart. You managed the crisis, repairs were made, and we continue forward. We continue forward, he repeats. But toward what? What is the endgame here? Do we maintain this system indefinitely, generation after generation? Do I pass this burden to our children, make them supreme leaders trapped by the same mythology that traps me? Ri Sol-ru turns to face him directly. You're asking questions that have no good answers. But you're also forgetting something important. You have agency, more than almost anyone in this country. If you want to change direction, you can. Not easily, not without risk, but it's possible. Is it? Sometimes I wonder if I'm really in control, or if I'm just performing a role, following a script that was written before I was born. She takes his hand. Then write a new script. Gradually, carefully, but write it. You've already made changes, the economic reforms. The slightly more open diplomacy, even little things like speaking more naturally with people, instead of using the formal language your father preferred. These are your choices, not your grandfather's legacy. He considers this. She's right that he has made changes, small evolutions in style and substance. But are they enough? Do they fundamentally alter the system, or merely put a new face on the same authoritarian structure? I don't know if I have the courage for truly revolutionary change, he admits. Revolution from within is harder than revolution from below. At least external revolutionaries don't have to worry about being overthrown by their own security forces. Then don't pursue revolution. Pursue evolution. Incremental change that doesn't trigger the defensive responses of the system. You have time, you're young still. You could rule for decades. Small changes accumulated over decades become fundamental transformation. It's pragmatic advice, and it aligns with his own instincts. He is not by nature a revolutionary, but a pragmatist. Someone who works within constraints rather than trying to shatter them. Perhaps that's exactly what North Korea needs, not dramatic upheaval, but patient, careful evolution toward something more sustainable. They return inside as the sun sets, preparing for the family dinner that has become an important ritual. When his schedule permits, around the table, conversation is light, dominated by the children's chatter about their activities and plans. Kim Jong-un participates, asking questions, sharing occasional stories from his own childhood, carefully edited to remove the complications and pressures that accompanied his upbringing. After dinner, after the children have been put to bed, Kim Jong-un returns to his private office to review papers that have accumulated during his day of relative rest. There are always more papers, more decisions, more problems requiring attention. As he works through them, he thinks about his conversation with Ri-Ru, about the possibility of evolution rather than revolution. Perhaps his legacy will not be dramatic transformation but simply survival and small improvements, laying groundwork that future generations might build upon. Perhaps that's enough to not make things worse, to keep the nation afloat through difficult times, to make incremental progress toward a more sustainable system. The modest ambition of a reluctant dictator. Hours later, as midnight approaches and he finally allows himself to stop working, Kim Jong-un returns to his bedroom. He performs his usual pre-sleep ritual, checking the security briefings one final time, setting multiple alarms for the morning, placing his secure phones within reach. Then he lies down, listening to the silence of the palace at night. His last conscious thoughts are a mixture of the day's reflections, the secret music studio, the portraits of his ancestors, the Yongbyon crisis, his children's laughter, his wife's pragmatic wisdom. All these pieces of his fragmented existence, the public and private, the leader and the man, the mythology and the reality. Tomorrow, he will wake and begin again, performing the role of supreme leader while privately maintaining his small rebellions, managing crises while dreaming of music, projecting absolute confidence while harboring profound doubts. This is the hidden side of Kim Jong-un that no one shows, not because it doesn't exist, but because it complicates the simple narratives that both his supporters and his critics prefer. He is neither the godlike figure of North Korean propaganda nor the cartoonish villain of Western media, but something far more complex and human, a man trapped in a role he cannot escape, doing his best to survive and perhaps, incrementally, make things slightly better. All while knowing that history's judgment will likely be harsh regardless of his intentions. As sleep finally claims him, his last thought is a question without answer. When this is all over, when history renders its verdict, will anyone understand, or will the mythology persist, obscuring the reality of who he actually was and what he actually faced? The question fades as consciousness slips away, and Kim Jong-un sleeps the troubled sleep of those who bear impossible burdens, awaiting another day of performing the role that is both his inheritance and his prison. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like.